Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of About Abroad, where it's my job to introduce you to people who have built amazing lives for themselves in various foreign corners of the globe. We're talking with expats and thought leaders about moving abroad, remote work, visas, and all the fun and practical knowledge that you need to know to follow in their footsteps. If you've ever dreamed of making a life for yourself overseas, maybe working remotely or embracing long-term travel, retiring or studying abroad, or even just taking a peek inside life beyond your borders, you've landed in the right place. My guest today is a good friend of mine and a friend of the show's as well. His name is Mitko Karshovski, and you might know him as the voice behind That Remote Life podcast or as the editor behind the Remote Insider newsletter. But today I brought him back on the show to discuss a variety of topics. We go in a whole bunch of different directions here, but one of the things I really wanted to make sure we got to was lifting the veil a little bit on some of the challenges associated with this lifestyle, with the nomad lifestyle, living abroad, all of these things. We might get a little bit grumpy old man on you here for a little while, but it's all with the idea that, sometimes nothing sounds better than home. And when we start living this lifestyle, we can often attach to the mindset and to the identity that comes with it and be afraid to give that up. We worked really hard to have it, and now you have it. And do you want to give it up? Are you going home with your tail between your legs? All these kind of things. These are real conversations that people are having off the air, and Mitko and I wanted to have it on the air. So we talk about that, and we get into a whole bunch of other things that I think are really relevant for the About Abroad audience. So I always enjoy catching up with Mitko. I hope you all will as well. Please help me in welcoming Mitko Karshovski to About Abroad. Wait, so I don't understand. How do you fail a 75 hard? Like, even if you just attempt it, in my mind, you're succeeding at life. So how do you fail?
I failed because when we flew back to the US from Mexico, I had this plan of because 75 hard is like 2 workouts a day. You have to stick to a diet, no alcohol, a gallon of water, and you have to read 20 pages of a nonfiction book. So I had a plan for everything except for the reading because it's the easy part. And then I caught myself 2 days into our move back to the US. And I was like, shit, I haven't read in like 2 days. And I was like, the 2 workouts a day I got and I had a system in place for, and like I was working really hard to like stick to the diet and like making my life really difficult about that and like mid travel. And I forgot to read, which is like this. It's so frustrating because that's the thing that like, and I understand that I could just keep going and whatnot, and I will keep going because I think it's like a better lifestyle with like all of those points. But I'm just so annoyed that the thing that got me is the easiest part, which is like the reading.
Come on, man. You could read 60 pages one day and you're caught up. Like that's different than the workout part, but I get it. No, I'm a commitment nerd. Like when I've committed to something, it's just like, I just have to do it. And if that streak breaks or whatever, then for some reason I'm like mentally, I can't get past it. So I can totally understand.
So one of the reasons why I wanted to do 75 hard was obviously to like get in better shape. That's like the one thing. But the other thing was like, I was feeling in a rut and I needed something to snap me out of it. And I know from experience that like the way to get out of a mental rut is through like physical things, right? Like moving, like just like your mind follows your body kind of thing. So I did it for that reason. And then the other reason is that like, I don't think of myself as someone who's very good at like follow through. Like, I'm not like one of these people that's like really good about like, or at least I don't think of myself that way. Like I dropped out of college and like I've had tons of different businesses that at one point I've like quit or decided not to follow through with. And I just wanted something to like, I'm going to do this. And actually 75 hard has like a really high failure rate, which a fellow friend of ours, Gonzalo, just like broke his leg on 75 hard. These kind of things tend to like get in the way. So I'm going to do it again after the holidays. So,
okay. All right. So how far into it did you make it?
60 days, which is the other super annoying
part.
part.
Come on, man. You're there. Oh, this is, I feel I would totally count that as just like keep going, especially if you kept up with the working out and the eating during a move from Mexico back to the US. Like that's that's the hard part. I mean, that's the hard part of the
But
75
since
hard.
I will admit that since realizing that I didn't read, I have slipped on the working out and on the eating part, more on the eating part. Um, because I ended up going to a Michigan tailgate and it was just the food was so good. And then, coming from Mexico where like beer is not a big culture and like you're gonna understand this, these IPAs just started passing in front of me and I was just like, oh, it's too good. Like I already knew I broke it and I was like, all right.
Thank God I didn't read those 20 pages.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't read
yeah.
those 20 pages. I can have one of those delicious IPAs. Got it. I
Yeah,
see. I see
maybe
how it happened.
maybe it was subconscious. Like my brain was like, "I'm gonna make you fail this." But I will say, on that note, I am incredibly stoked about the amount of non-alcoholic beer options that are actually good in the United States. This is the benefit, and I'm sure we're going to talk about this about being in the US, is because for we have such a large consumer culture, which obviously pros and cons. But one of the pro is that because we have such an advanced consumer culture, there's like so many niche, high quality items that like I can go and buy, like I don't know if you've heard of like Athletic Brewing, but they have non-alcoholic beer that's like actually good. Um and also like Sarah and I just bought non-alcoholic liquor. Like she bought a gin and I bought a bourbon. So they're supposed to get here today. So I'm excited to like test those. But that's also do you know Kettle and Fire? Have you ever heard of that company?
No.
So the guy's name is, hold on, let me find the guy's name because if I don't, I keep forgetting his name. Jason. His name is Justin Mayers. Okay, so Kettle and Fire is like one of those first companies years ago that started packaging like bone broth for people who like that was like a big thing. And one of the things that he talks about is like he likes to live in what he calls edge city, which is like hanging around people who are constantly on the edge because then you see trends, you can spot trends before they hit the mainstream. And so he got into Kettle and Fire way before kind of like the bone broth thing took off. And then now his new thing is non alcoholic alcohols. And they started it like 2 or 3 years ago. And then now it's like, I mean, now everyone that I talk to is like, yeah, I'm like really trying not to drink and like all this kind of stuff. Um, and I really like this idea of edge city. That's been a new thing that for me has been like, I like the term.
I like the term a lot too. I also think the non-alcohol, like not drinking thing is a big part. Like it's going to be a massive movement that wave has already started to swell. My wife stopped drinking 2.5 years ago, I think, and has experimented with all the non-alcoholic beers and the non-alcoholic, wines and non-alcoholic liquors and stuff. And like, yeah, there's some really good ones. There's also some really bad ones that just taste like sugar water and it feels like it's like somehow doing more damage. But yeah, I mean, you see, like once you dip your toe in that world, you see that there's like a whole ecosystem of this, not just like products, but also people that are like really passionate about it. And it's interesting for me being over here in Europe, seeing how that changes country to country and how like ridiculous, like you can pass from Spain into Italy. And in Spain, it's totally normal for somebody to be out having a non-alcoholic beer like at dinner with a bunch of people and just like, yeah, and there's a bunch of options. You go to Italy and they're like, no, we don't have that. Or like it does not exist. And then you pass up into Germany and they have like on tap, a delicious Hefeweizen, but also a Hefeweizen alcoholfrei. And you're like, oh, sweet. So anyway, it's like, it's becoming much more of a normal thing. Greece always has, I would have thought so too. No, they always have a non-alcoholic option, at least one, a
Really
non-alcoholic beer. Yeah, yeah,
interesting. Because in Bulgaria they'll laugh at you. I think
yeah.
like if you ask for like a non-alcoholic beer, they'll be like,
If you want to feel really stupid, go to Italy and ask if they have non-alcoholic wine. That's fun.
I've never heard of non-alcoholic wine. But I imagine
It does
also if you ask them
exist.
for
Yeah.
gluten-free pasta, they would also be quite upset.
Yes, you just don't mess with gastronomy in Italy. Like they're literally like that's grape juice. But anyway, yeah, it's an interesting thing. So yeah, I mean, I wanna spend some time on this though. Like that's one of the things you notice coming back from Mexico to the US. I'm very intrigued to hear about this idea of kind of like pulling the plug on a life abroad. But before we get to that, I would love to do like a quick recap because we haven't caught up in a long time. You have just spent several months, I don't know how long, living in Mexico, which has kind of become like a default second home for you guys over the years. But what have the last, like, I don't know, since we last caught up, like what does it look like for you from a travel standpoint? Just more or less. I'm just kind of trying to like lay the groundwork here.
I'm trying to think when the last time we talked was, but like let's just say since the start of 2023, so we're recording in September, we've been in Mexico the entire time with like one stint in June of like Europe and the US. So we lived in a couple places in Mexico. We did Querétaro, which is a really great town, sort of like 2 hours northwest of Mexico City. And then afterwards, we went to Puerto Vallarta, where we've been before, and this time it was different that we were actually there during the summer. So we obviously went there in January, which is like normal for us. But then we stayed through like May, June, July, etc., which is like when we would have normally gone to Europe, because we were already trying to like settle down. So we kind of wanted to do a full year in Mexico, but just because of multiple things that were going on, which I'm assuming we'll talk about, we kind of decided, Sarah and I, my wife and I, decided to actually like come back to the U.S. instead of sticking through a full year in Mexico. And so Mexico in the summer is not a joke, man. I have never experienced heat or humidity like what I experienced and this is just PV. Obviously, Mexico is a huge country, but in PV, I was melting. I've never experienced like walking outside and then just immediately sweating. I had to take multiple showers. I now understand why like Italians and Spanish like put on so much cologne because you're just constantly aware of your body odor that is like like just intense. So yeah, it was cool though. I mean, it was nice to be in Mexico for such a long time. Also, like really tiring in a lot of different ways. And so we just came back to the U.S. Decided like, hey, like let's cut our time short in Mexico. Like let's go back to the U.S. and chill out here for a little bit. So yeah.
What was tiring in Mexico? Like you said, like for a little bit of context, why I say that, I'm feeling some of that fatigue. I think also, and like life on the road just life on the road, life abroad, life outside your comfort zone is something a lot of people like you and I seek. But then there is a point where like you just kind of want to go home, it's a weird feeling.
Yeah, what's tiring is like we've always talked about being a digital nomad is kind of like having a part-time job, right? Because you have whatever you do for a living, but then you also have this other thing that takes up like RAM. It's like an open tab on your Chrome that is like, where am I living next month? And where like I need to find a house and like a place to stay. And there's just this like constant background thing that's taking up space and that's taking up some of your thinking. And so that in and of itself becomes tiring. And that is also the like really exciting part. Like when you hit the road for the first time and you're like, oh, where there's so many possibilities and there's all these places that I could go. And like, that's the exciting part. But after a while, it actually becomes like really exhausting. Um, the other tiring part for us was like a lack of community. Like Sarah and I started saying this over and over again. Like we want the How I Met Your Mother experience. Like I want to be able to go down to the pub and have a non-alcoholic beer with my friend that I know is going to be there. Do you know what I mean? Like I just want like more of like a community. And while you can do that abroad, and I know people who've done it. I've done it in the past. I know you've done it in the past too. There is some level of like, there was something about being back in the US, in a city that we know and we love, and that like we want to grow our relationship with as like a place. Um, that we just kept like seeing cool things happening in Cincinnati where we're from, and we're like, oh, this looks so much fun, and like I can't wait to go back and visit. And we were already planning on coming back to Cincinnati after our year in Mexico, and we kind of just had this like realization of like, why are we waiting? You know what I mean? Like, why don't we just do this now? And we both realize as well, like, I'll just put this out there that like this isn't, we know ourselves well enough to know it's not like we'll never travel again. We're settling down and like now we're pursuing this like white picket fence life. Like we very consciously know we've done this before, and the maximum that we've stayed here home is 8 months. So all of our family is like, yeah, okay. Like you say you're coming back, but this is the third time this has happened. And like, we'll see. My dad has told us, for example, this is the last move. He said that I've exhausted my ability to call for moves because he's moved us in and out of apartments so many times. He's like, this is the last one. Like, from now on, moving company. So it is. So we'll see. Like our kind of goal is to do a year here with the possibility of extending to a second year, because we have some plans of like what we want to accomplish in those 2 years here.
Nice. I can relate to you on this, man. I remember my wife and I moved back to the US after about a year and a half of being abroad and some other like stints here and there. But like we came back, and in our minds, we had actually sort of like, we didn't have that honest conversation with ourselves. It was more just like, this is what we're doing. Like we're moving back. We're going to buy a house. We're going to like settle in here, and we'll, maybe just do some short trips and stuff. And I don't know why that was the mentality at the time. I think we were legitimately just like exhausted. And this was, 7 years ago or something. So anyway, a while ago, remote work was different, whatever. But I remember having this conversation with, we moved back to the same city my brother was living in, and we were talking, and I was like, yeah, man, isn't it so awesome? Like we're here, we're like neighbors, we're going to see each other all the time. And he looked at me and he's like, you're not going to be here very long. And I was like, what do you mean? Like, he totally caught me off guard. He was like, I mean, maybe like 6 months or a year at the most, but he's like, you'll be gone before long. And I just remember thinking like, no, man, I'm here. Like I'm settling in. I'm committing to this place. And sure enough, I mean, we were there like a year and a half, and then we were off again. But anyway, I think I just think it's funny because sometimes people know us better than us.
What year was that?
That was like, I want to say 7 years ago. So maybe like
Yeah.
2015
17,
ish.
16, 16.
16, yeah, 16. Yeah. Something
Yeah.
like that.
So that's funny. That's exactly when Sarah and I started traveling. So we did our like initial digital nomad stint in 2016, and then saw that it worked, came back, kind of like had a few things to wrap up. And then in 2017, we kind of hit the road officially. But I think the reason why I asked that is I think like the digital nomad, expat, whatever that whole world is that conversation is like really advanced, where it's not this or that, it's this and that. And like I think these conversations need to evolve to talking a lot more about like home bases. Um and
Dude, this
like
is what I hear
I full
everybody talking about is home base, like this, the idea of a home base and then like going from there, or two home bases and then going from there is like, and see, you mentioned community earlier, like those two things being very tightly linked, because I think it's kind of like one and the same. It's not the physical house, it's the community around that. Is like, it's what we're all seeking in this next step.
and it's and there's multiple companies that are trying to do something there, which I don't know if there's anyone that's quite like cracking the code, but there's like attempts, there's like shots on goal, which to me is important. And like there's, I definitely think there's something like, I remember even way back in the day talking with like Tynan, who is like one of the like, if you don't know Tynan, just search Tynan on Google and you'll find he's like the craziest person I've interviewed for my podcast in a good way. But him and like a bunch of his friends started purchasing properties all over the world, where it was like him and like 10 of his best friends just started, like, every year he would essentially make like a pitch deck for a location. He found a couple, like a property that he kind of painted a picture for, and he'd go in and like buy these properties. So now they have like all these apartments all over the world. They have an island off the coast of Canada, for example. Like, they've done like stuff like this. And I remember hearing that in like 2018, when I 19, whenever it was that I first spoke with them. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. And I want to do this. And now there's companies that are almost like productizing that or trying to productize it. I think there's like a lot of opportunity around like the co-living aspect of that as well. But also like Lauren, our mutual friend Lauren Razavi, just wrote this post, and she introduced this term of like home basing versus home ports, which are like, imagine being able to, like, the way that I think about it, and I don't know if this is exactly what she meant, but like on like a sailboat or like ship example, you have a port and you can just dock at for a small amount of time and then like undock and go on to the next port. And people on like on the newsletter really resonated with that. And I think that's interesting, where you have like home bases and then home ports. You know what I mean? That are like maybe shorter
So
term.
so how does that differ? Like you don't actually own the property with like a home port mentality. You're more just like you float between like 2 or 3 different places, but you always kind of go back to the same place. Like if you went to the same co-living, for example.
Yeah, I have no idea. I just like this. There's a part of like mental masturbation to this where it's like, "Ooh, cool idea. Does it really mean anything?" I'm not sure. But you can kind of like start. I do think definitions are an important part of seeing things. Like, there was that research done. I don't know if you've read about this, that like certain African tribes there are colorblind to colors they don't have words for. Have you heard about this
Mm.
before?
No,
So
that's
like
fascinating.
if you actually think about it, the color blue is not a very common color. Like, yes, you see it in the sky, but like actually the amount of things, the like actual like occurrences of the color blue in items are in nature are not that high. So even if you read like the Odyssey, it like things that we now think of like the color blue are actually like used different. Like the color blue as like a word didn't really exist. And so what they actually found, and like the way that this kind of circles back, is that like if you don't have a word for something, you can't spot the pattern. The moment that you have a word to define it, you'll start to like see the pattern, because like your brain can like connect the dots. So that's why I think these sort of like this terminology, like that's when that's important, is that like when you give something a term and you give it a definition, you actually give your brain the ability to like spot that. So wow, it's kind of like fun to make up names about certain things. Like, I do think there is like that important, there is that aspect to it that's important.
Yeah, 100% true, man. And I think like the more we talk about these things, the more we can kind of speak it into existence, because I mean, I cannot tell you the number of conversations that I've had with people on the podcast and off that are in some form or another. Like, I think a lot of us have gone through the like honeymoon phase with a life abroad, whether that's, being an expat or a nomad, like, workation or whatever. It's some of the novelty has worn off, and then you settle into like real life. And to be honest, like a lot of the novelty for me wore off a long time ago, but I still am like getting my fix from the adventure and some of the challenges that come with this lifestyle. But I'm finding that it's to a higher degree now, and that there are some things that like sound really nice about home. Like when you said that earlier, you're like, just the idea of being back home, like really sounded nice. And I think a lot of that comes from community. A lot of it comes from the sense of normalcy. And so, yeah, I think like, I feel very confident that this space is going to evolve. I don't know what it means. Like, same as you, it's like, I don't know exactly what that means, if it's productized or if services become available, but I just think the general concept of like going abroad for a while or spending some time traveling with your family or whatever it may be, but then coming back to wherever it is that you call home for a period of time as well, is kind of like the next step.
I also think you and I have uh gained weight in a travel aspect. Like you and I both have dogs. You and I are both married. Like, that reduces our options, right? Where like I can imagine someone who's like 23 and literally has a backpack and a laptop, like I was when I had, like when I was 23, are probably like, what are you talking about? Like there's never been more co-living spaces that you could like, I think this is a lot easier to do when you don't have as much things to carry around with, both literally and figuratively.
Yeah,
Um,
that's true.
because
I did though. It's funny. Like I'm here. I'm in Crete, Greece right now as we record this, and I'm hanging out with one of my coworkers, and her husband just passed through here. She's probably listening to this. What's up, Summer? And she and her husband were telling me. So they like just yesterday we were hanging out, and they were like, "Yeah, we do month to month now. They're like perpetual nomads." They do month to month now. I'm like, oh, how long have you been doing that? They were like, last month was our first month. We did a month in Norway. And I was like, and you're doing a month here in Greece? Like, yeah. And then I was like, what'd you do before that? And they're like, oh, we would just like literally sometimes go day to day, like at the most, like 4 or 5 days was like a big commitment.
that sounds
And they
exhausting.
were, I know, I was like amazed. I was like, wait, you've been doing this for years? And they're like, yeah, yeah, they do. But they have a home base back in Australia where they're from. And they go back like 2, 3 months a year and spend time there and spend like they do spend a little bit of time in a few places. So they kind of have the home base thing going and have been doing that for a long time. But in their mind, they just slowed down to 1 month at a time. And they're like, this is really good. Like you get to, it's not so exhausting. It's not so tiring. So anyway, it's also funny how it's like your vantage point matters a lot. For me, like we've been, for anybody that like doesn't know exactly, maybe you don't even know Mitko, like we left Spain a year and a half ago and have been traveling since then. So after 5 years abroad in Spain, like pretty much living in the same place, doing a good bit of traveling, but always like coming back to our base. We left in the camper van, drove around. We've been renting Airbnbs for 1 to 3 months at a time. And like, that's become exhausting for us. Like we were in the same place for like 3 months in this case. And we're like, that's enough. Like I need at least 3 months in a place before I even feel like picking up and looking for the next place.
So there's this girl, her name is Unjaded Jade on YouTube, and it's so interesting because she's quite a bit younger. I think she just graduated college, but has like a huge YouTube following. And I listened to her talk about this, and it's really interesting how she didn't even use the term nomadic. It was just what she was doing, and she was doing it through her studies. Like I don't remember exactly what her degree was in, but she had to spend time abroad for her degree. And what she was saying was that for her, 4 months was the sweet spot because you essentially have 1 month of ramp on and 1 month of ramp off, which I really resonated with, where like, when you're like close enough to the departure date, you kind of start like you don't really feel that settled anymore. And so you essentially have like a month to ramp on, figure out the place, find like the where you slot yourself into the puzzle kind of thing, like where does your piece fit into the puzzle piece of that community in that space. And then you have 2 months to like enjoy it, and then you have like a month to ramp off. And I've always done 3 months, but that is I kind of like the idea of 4 months.
I think it's
Um,
the right number.
yeah.
It's funny.
Like
Like
6 is
I
too
totally agree.
long, you know?
Yep.
And especially in like taxation as well, that starts getting you start obviously gets a bit more difficult there. Um, but yeah, I wrote about this. Like I wrote this post recently. It was called "Flag Theory for the 99%," and I kind of discussed exactly these ideas of like hard and soft bases, where like kind of thinking about this long term and saying like, hey, if you're going to be doing this for 30, 40 years, you can't just expect that you're going to be happy to be a digital nomad with 2 backpacks, right? Like you kind of need to start thinking about where do you have hard bases, which are like places where you have some sort of ownership, right? Like maybe you own property or you have some kind of connection to the community. And then soft bases, which are just like places that that you come back to, that you kind of have like, I know where the grocery store is and I know where the gym is. And you know what I mean? These sort of things. Um, and I think that that's kind of like an interesting, going back to Lauren's idea of like home bases and like home ports. I think that there's like a little play there on that as well.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It's funny. Like this is such a small thing, but it's like one of these. It's a perfect example that was running through my head earlier today. So I've been here for about 2 months, and I like after about 6 weeks, I felt like I kind of had my routine down. Like because you can say you have a routine, and then you can just take that routine from one place to the next, but it changes with like for example, where my house is located here versus where my co-working is versus where my gym is. Like those three things change, so my commute between them changes, and the schedule at those places and what things are available versus not available. So I end up like reconfiguring my schedule everywhere I go. And anyway, like 6 8 weeks into my time here, I've been this like route that I've been riding my bike to get to the gym and then get like back to my house. I ended up having to walk like 4 blocks down a one-way street with no sidewalk, essentially, because this is what Google Maps told me to do like my first day here. So like I've just been naively, blindly following this path, thinking it makes the most sense. And it was just like a few days ago that I realized there was this little side street that I could take that would totally cut that off and drop me like right in front of my house. And I could ride the whole way there. So it saved me like 10 minutes, which is negligible. But the whole thing was like every day I was so frustrated, like walking down this street, like on this little, like with cars flying by me and just being like, there should be a sidewalk here and there's not. Why do I have to go this way? And it's only after like 6 weeks that I like finally figured that out. Like, oh, and my day just got like 1% better every day. And so there's a million of those things that I've experienced over the years. And like, it takes some time, and then you can like settle in and enjoy it. But it also needs to be not so long that it feels like you have to like make it your place and you're going to like start to settle roots in and then be like, okay, now it's time to go. That like 3 to 4 months sweet spot is nice.
Do we sound like grumpy old men right now? Are
Yeah,
we?
totally. Oh,
Yeah,
this
we're
is the
like
point.
we're
This is why we're having this conversation, because nobody, I'm having this conversation with a lot of people, like other people bringing this up, but nobody wants to talk about it because you sound like you're, like detached from reality and also like grumpy and not thankful and not grateful. And it's like, no, dude, I love this lifestyle. I'm so appreciative I get to do this, but there's downsides and we don't always have to do like the Instagram version of what this lifestyle is like.
like okay, like our mutual friend Grayson, who has been a nomad for like 2 years, but I feel like he has like he's doing it really well, right? Where and like I mean I think he's going faster than like what I would like to do, but like he's really like embraced it. But I feel like comparing myself to him, I'm like a grumpy old guy that's like digital nomadism is so great, but like it'd be like I'm starting what was it like it's just these like stupid things where I'm like, why isn't there an outlet here? You know what I mean? Like if like, I don't know, I just compare myself now and I'm realizing that like I have aged.
Yeah, totally. A little like foreshadowing here. Grayson will actually make an appearance on About Abroad later this season, so I'm stoked to talk to him because he is doing some really cool stuff in the remote workspace, but also like one of those truly like just like month to month, like he'll go from Argentina to Sri Lanka and go spend a month in one place and a month in the other. And you're like, dude, I don't know how you do it. And he loves it. Like he's so thrilled with the lifestyle and he's been doing it for a couple years now. So I'm envious of that energy. Like I'm honestly like, that's awesome, man. I wish I could do that.
Yeah, my hypothesis, and you'll have to ask him this when he comes on the podcast, but I think having a side business, like a side hustle, takes up the like I think you and I would be able to do that if we had jobs and nothing else. And then the actual travel and the planning and all that kind of stuff becomes your side hustle kind of thing. But now that he's starting to do, from my understanding, a bit more extra things on that end, I wonder. I think that the like, if you have like your job, your side hustle, and then also doing all that planning, doing month to months, I think that's when it gets too much.
Yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, it is. I spend a lot of my free time, like for better or worse. I don't know if I just like do it to myself or like if it's actually necessary or if I just like I'm a glutton for punishment and I just love it. But like I spend so much of my time researching researching and planning travel. And like for example, we're moving from Greece to Italy, and like all the logistics involved, like multiple ferries, getting a van on ferries, getting a dog on ferries, finding a new place to stay, mapping out different, different stuff, like all the normal stuff. But then like also we're here in Greece, so it's like, what are we going to do this weekend? Like we want to go experience this great place, but we got to choose between this place or that place. And so you end up like, I spend a ton of my time doing it. It's what I love. Like I mean, it really is like fun for me in a lot of ways, but yeah, it becomes like a third job.
I do have to say though, this is gonna sound bad, like outsourced this because actually Sarah does a lot of our planning on that end. So I actually don't. I kind of just am, yeah, in the good way. It's her superpower, not mine. But it's like, so maybe I can't. It's not like I spend that much time thinking about it. But again, it's like taking up RAM. You know what I mean? It's like still taking up, like you're kind of thinking about it. Now that for us has become like looking at apartments because I'm really looking forward to having like my own office. That to me sounds so sexy. Like like I want to have like a nice background, and like it just like yeah. I That to me sounds so good right now. And we are spending like a lot of time looking at like apartments and kind of dreaming about what it'd be like to be in that apartment. So
I'm glad you said this because this is so I've kind of been doing some of this like tongue in cheek here, like over dramatizing some of the quote unquote downsides in a way. But like the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you here is because we were talking about it a little bit, just like pulling the plug on the life abroad and some things that you guys considered moving back to the US, some things that my wife and I are considering. And I think I think it's important to bring some of that stuff out. But one thing that I recently read that really resonated with me on this subject is like our brains are predisposed to trying to create problems to solve. So like going back to like our Neanderthal ancestors, like they were always trying to solve problems because you're always like preparing for something. So your brain doesn't stop creating the problems or the potential problems to solve. So for us, like you might be exhausted from travel planning, hypothetically, right? So you're like, oh, going home sounds nice because then I just know how everything works and I'll just be able to like chill. But in reality, you're going to fill that space with trying to find the perfect apartment, the perfect office, getting that sexy background. So you're going to fill that void one way or the other. And I think it's just about like choosing very intentionally how you're going to fill that void, what feels right in that moment, and going with it and not being afraid to like back off because is this who I'm going to become for forever? If I leave, this can go either way. If you're going to leave your home and move abroad or become a nomad and quit your job or whatever it is, like that doesn't define who you are for forever. And then the same is true when you reverse course and you're like, hey man, I'm going to give up my nomad life for a little while. Yeah, I know I worked really hard to have this, but I'm going to go back and solve a different set of problems now.
yeah, I wrote about this a couple months ago, and it was almost like this very therapeutic piece because it was a lot of like the things that I was like saying, I was also saying to myself in terms of like, I call this like borrowed identities. And one problem that I see in the digital nomad world is we really like that identity. And there's so many people that I meet that I have conversations in private that in public would not happen, where people say things like what we're saying here, that they're tired, that they're XYZ, like whatever, but it's what makes us special. That digital nomad tag, you throw that on Instagram and you're immediately like special compared to everyone, quote unquote, back home. And because of that, it becomes really, really hard for you to have that honest decision, I think, of like, hey, maybe this isn't serving me anymore. And so it becomes really hard for you to make that decision to go back to or go settle in a place or whatever because you feel like, well, who am I if I'm not a digital nomad? That has become such a linchpin in my personality and who I am as a person that you can't make that decision. Um, and like that's why I really like this idea of like borrowed identities, which means like that doesn't mean that you stop being that, but like think about it as like borrowing a book. You can take that book off the bookshelf and read it, and it's okay to put it back, right? It doesn't you don't stop being that person. Like we oftentimes say, like we're nomadically minded, and we still get along with people who are nomadically minded even here in the United States. I'm not going to a farm in Alabama. Like great people, I'm sure, but not really somebody that I can have a lot in common with or like to talk a lot with. But like, I think uh, that to me has been like a real mindset shift around like you can put the book away. Doesn't mean that you can't borrow it again at another time.
We'll be right back to the show after a quick break for a note from our sponsor. This episode is brought to you by my friends over at Lexity. I've lived abroad in various countries, and one common denominator I've found is that dealing with foreign bureaucracy is a nightmare. Trying to navigate visa and immigration waters in another language is not something I'd recommend ever trying on your own, even for the most experienced of us. So when I recently had to renew my Spanish visa again, I turned it over to the pros at Lexity. They've already helped more than 5,000 expats and digital nomads find a home and thrive in countries like Portugal, or in my case, Spain, also Italy, France, and Greece. Some very desirable locations indeed. So whether you're trying to obtain your first visa abroad, purchase a property, or work through international tax issues, Lexity's team of friendly lawyers is here to simplify your journey. The team is super knowledgeable, bilingual, and thorough, and I seriously cannot recommend their services enough. My experience working with them has been incredible, and I can honestly say I don't know that I would have EU permanent residency if it wasn't for the help of the team at Lexity. So if you're ready to make your move abroad, then Lexity is offering an exclusive discount to About Abroad listeners. Grab 10% off your first service with the code AboutAbroad2023 and learn more over at Lexity.com in the show notes and start your abroad journey today. If you've made it this far into the episode and you're still enjoying yourself, then I would love to ask a quick favor. Open up the app that you're using to listen to this podcast and leave a quick review. You can do this in Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and really just about any platform that allows podcast listening now. If you can't find that in the interface of the app, then scroll down in the show notes and find ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, and you should be able to leave it from there. Thanks so much, guys. We really appreciate it and hope you enjoy the rest of the show. I've got a question for you. And like, as a little anecdote to that, I actually met someone who was like sort of a travel influencer, nomadic influencer, like actually making pretty good money through their following while they're taking travel photos and videos of different places around the world and stuff. But like, he wasn't really enjoying it anymore. And so he gave that up to try to like re-find his joy in travel. But what he ended up, so like to make that clear, like he's like, I make money traveling via my Instagram. Exactly. Like, for example, I'm going to give up Instagram, stop posting on Instagram and just travel because that's truly what I love. And what he found out very quickly was that he had actually just become addicted to like the identity of being the perpetual traveler and being this Instagram influencer. And now he like really didn't enjoy it. And so he just like, he was like, actually like, yeah, I was kind of getting the joy sucked out of me through that. But I'm also like, I don't even really love traveling anymore. Like I'm tired and I just kind of want to go home and he's from Latin America and just moved back to Latin America. And like, he's like, yeah, I'm just going to stay home. So anyway, kind of interesting. But for you, like you host a podcast, That Remote Life. You are the editor behind the Remote Insider. Like it's a part of your business and identity. What went through your mind as you guys were making this decision to hang up the nomad hat for a little while? Like, was it serious or did you just kind of like move right past it?
Both. So it was serious, and it's definitely something that I definitely had that concern. But like one thing I have always been cognizant of is that I'm very, very grateful and thankful that I'm a good people person. I've never had a problem connecting with people. And like even from the beginning of my journey, I've known people that were 20 steps ahead. And I'd had conversations with them where they were at this point. And so there was always something in the back of my head of like, don't become the travel influencer, because you immediately not that you can't get out of that. Like there's certainly people who have figured out a way around those problems, but like either don't become attached to that identity and have like a way out, or like don't assume that identity right away anyways. And even though I write a lot of like digital nomad content, I think a lot of my content is not, if you actually like read it and you're not like a digital nomad, you'll still relate with it. So that has always been there. But I'm also very like, I don't know, I, I'm going to do what I think is best for me. And if something blows up because of that, then like, all right, I'll figure something else out. Do you know what I mean? I do think so much of the things that I've always been writing about has been around like just in terms of like the future of work and business, and how these things all relate together as things kind of like move forward. So even though I kind of went really deep on the digital nomad thing for a couple of years, that is actually like a really small part of what I'm interested in, if that makes sense. Which is why now we're rebranding the entire brand. It's not going to be called That Remote Life anymore. The idea why it was called That Remote Life was because it was like it sounded broad at the time. Now it is not that broad because of just things that have transpired. Um, but I think this is actually the first place that I'm officially publicly saying what the name of the new brand will be, which is going to be Work from Mars. And the idea there, yes, you should feel very, very.
I
I
feel
don't know the
I
word.
just want to take a moment
Honored.
to fan
Yeah, yeah,
off
yeah.
my
We can
I'm
pause.
getting
Yes.
emotional. That's amazing. Yeah,
Yeah.
thanks for letting us know. That's
Um,
awesome.
but the reason why the brand is going to be called Work from Mars is because years ago, when I decided to kind of start working remotely and dedicate myself to that, uh, people would ask me why, because it sounded stupid in 2016 when I said, I think remote work is kind of going to be big. And people were like, that sounds weird. That sounds silly, these sort of things. But I always had this answer of like, I believe that we are destined to be a multiplanetary species. Like I think we're gonna have something on Mars. I think there's gonna be something on the moon. Like history tells us we kind of tend to expand to land that we have available. And I think it's going to be really, really sad if we go all the way to Mars just to end up working in cubicles. And I think remote work is going to be something that we have to figure out. If that is our eventual future, remote work is something we're going to have to figure out along the way. So maybe it's not going to be in the next 5 years. Maybe it's not going to be in the next 10 years, but maybe in 100 years, someone's going to scratch my ego and be like, that Mitko guy was right. Like I'll be dead, but at least I'll have like, like an earmark or whatever. Obviously COVID changed a lot of that, but it's kind of like a tongue-in-cheek way of saying we're here to explore what the future of work means. And that's not just remote work. Like I think we're only getting started, and like the way in which we work and the way in which we live, and a lot of this conversation has been kind of echoing that, is going to change. And that's kind of like what I've always been really interested in writing about, with remote work, digital nomadism, all that kind of stuff being a part, being like columns of that topic.
Yeah, it's funny. I started About Abroad very intentionally, not as a remote work podcast. Like that was the idea, is that it's going to talk about the broader subject of global mobility, which remote work facilitates, but it's only one thing that facilitates it. So like my first season, if you go back and look at the first season, like half was about remote work. The other half was about people who had figured out some way to move abroad or to go, travel without having to find remote work. Like one person was a flight attendant and like figured out how to live abroad and be based in a bunch of different countries and travel from there all the time. And so anyway, like I also often get like lumped into the just specific remote work silo. And I'm very excited about breaking down that barrier a little bit and being like, it's just one avenue. And it happens to be that avenue is much more available. There's a lot more cars on that street now. And the exit ramp to get on that highway is a whole lot more accessible, but there's other avenues you can travel as well. And there's not just like one way to do this. You certainly don't have to slide yourself into some influencer or like perpetual traveler silo either. Like there's a lot of different ways to do this. You can come and go as you please, weave in and out if you like. and do what feels right in the moment. I think is like, that's the thing I'm circling back to is like, you really have to do what's right for you in the moment and not like have that FOMO of missing out on whatever the ulterior option was because you want it to like serve some fix that you're chasing.
Yeah. There's also like, I forgot to say this. I went on a tangent a couple minutes ago. But I think Mark Manson, who, obviously now we know as like the author of The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck and all like mega famous writer. But did you know he was a digital nomad originally?
I did not know that. Does he mention that in the book? Because I read the book, but I don't recall that part.
I'm not sure, but like we have mutual friends because he's like an OG nomad. And I actually, one of my friends said, I remember going to a friend's wedding and he was there. And I was like, hey, Mark, like, what are you working on these days? And he's like, I'm like writing this book. I don't really know if it's going to turn out into anything. And then he was like, a year later, he's like, the biggest author ever. But he spent like years doing like the Thailand digital nomad, like in the like Tim Ferriss days, like he was like truly like one of the like OG nomads post, like, that time period. And he has a really, really, I think, important note as someone who's been there, done that, which he talks about the diminishing return of travel, which is this idea that like the first country that you travel to and you immerse yourself in the culture is going to change your life. Like you're going to get so much return on that investment. It's going to change the way you think. You're going to meet people who have different life backgrounds from you. Like you're going to learn a lot. And like it's going to be the same thing with like the second, the third country. But then the fourth country is going to give you a little bit less back than the third. And like the 10th country will not be as impactful as the first country. And you can become this person who is constantly you're almost like a drug addict, like looking for that high that you got from the first country, but not realizing that that will never happen because you like there's a diminishing rate of return on that investment. And I think that that's like really, really important and something that we don't talk about enough in like our space.
Yeah, but I mean that I feel that, and I'm glad to have it like a nice tagline to call it because I wasn't sure how to label it before, but that makes perfect sense. And again, like it's just something that I keep hearing from people behind the scenes, and find it really, really interesting. And at the heart of it is like, for me at least, is like I'm finding myself really enjoying like being in places and just being there. And I used to, for example, like at one point, like I loved to go to a country and like if I had come here to Crete, where I am now, like I would have conquered Crete like 10 years ago, 5 years ago. I would have seen like all the sites, like I would have done all the cool historical tours and the cooking classes. But one of my wife and I, our favorite thing to do is like do cooking classes in different countries. And like, but we've just been here and just been like, we just kind of want to like chill and just be here and just enjoy it. And find some community, meet some friends, hang out, and just like relax. Like we've done very, very little on the on the top 10 list, but it's just been super nice and enjoyable just to like be around cool people, spend some time in one place, and I think seeking more of that.
Yeah. I know we're running out of time, but like what are you looking forward to? Like what's on like your plans now? I mean, I know you're going to Italy, which I guess bad podcast or etiquette, but like I'm asking two questions in one. But you said you wanted something different from Greece, so then you go to Italy, which I'm like, as a European, I'm like same but different kind of thing. Like I would imagine like, if you had gone to like Germany, I'd be like, okay, makes sense. But you said I don't like this Southern European country. Let me go to this other Southern European country.
That's
So
a
I
really
want to
fair
hear
point.
like why that was like the answer to Greece. But then also like what are your plans for, Q4 and like, next year?
Oh yeah, so I guess they do seem relatively similar in a lot of ways. But no, what I meant when I said that was we were just looking to like have a change from like the island life, not because we're wanting to leave the islands. It's been awesome here in Greece, and Crete in particular is just like incredible. I could spend a ton more time here. But when we were talking about where we wanted to spend like the fall and the winter, we were just saying like it'd be great to go back up towards the Alps and spend some time up there. And we spent a good bit of time now in like the German speaking countries in the Alps. And so we were wanting to explore the Italian side. And also like I've always had an interest in learning Italian. I'm not going to get fluent. We're going to be there for like, 3-4 months. So I'm not talking about that, but like, I just thought it'd be cool to learn a little bit of Italian, immerse myself there for a little bit. And also like just, fall, winter in the mountains. We'll be there for Christmas, like the European Christmas villages and in the mountains and snow, and go pull out the snowboard, go snowboarding. So yeah, when I said that about wanting a change from Greece, that's what I meant, was just like going up towards, it was more like mountains versus islands, I guess, than it was Greece versus Italy. So yeah, I'm totally looking forward to that. I mean, some time in Italy is going to be amazing. Up in the Italian Alps, the Alps region is like one of my favorite regions in the world. And I haven't spent a ton of time there. I've only been there in summer in this part of Italy. So this will be unique, a lot of snow, and obviously a lot of good food. And also like this area is super cool because it's actually on the border with Austria. So like there's places around there where they speak like a fusion of like Italian and German, or just German is the predominant language. You almost feel like more like you're in Austria or something. So it's called South Tyrol. So anyway, I'm very much so looking forward to all that. But again, like I can't say enough about our time here in Greece. Like the people have been amazing. The food is incredible. The beaches and natural beauty like speaks for itself. So yeah, 100% not running from Greece, just like seasonal change. We did our summer in the Greek islands, and now we want to go up to the mountains. And this is also like part of just like scoping out a lot of different portions of Europe that we haven't spent a lot of time in before. Like I'd been to Greece and done some of the islands, but in like a very touristy way, like Santorini, Mykonos, spent some time in Athens. But like had never come and just like really spent time here and like gotten to know the people, learn a little bit of the language, like explore some of the stuff off the beaten track. And so we wanted to do that. And then like the path to get here, of course, was this trip, driving. Like we drove from Germany, so we drove down through like Croatia and Albania and Montenegro, and got to experience some of that area too. So this has all been sort of like a 5-6 month journey to see all those places, spend some time here, and now that summer's coming to an end, we're starting to think about the next chapter. And apparently, turning that page took us to Italy. So I'm excited about that, man. Should be a lot of fun.
Interesting. But this is also like an important thing. Someone told me they got triggered by one of my emails recently, because I talked about like arbitrage jail. And I think there's these people that like read Tim Ferriss and like hear about these like locations where you can live off of just like $1,000 a month, and you're like, this is so awesome. And then you sort of like set up your life to only run off of $1,000 a month, but then you find yourself stuck because you can't go back home. Or when you feel like you want to upgrade your life, and like maybe you've been living in Thailand or Vietnam for a certain amount of time, and you're like, oh, like Amsterdam would be really great, but you actually can't because Amsterdam is more expensive. And I think there's a lot of people that are actually kind of like, you enter that world because you're looking for like a life of freedom, but you trade one jail for another. Like you trade one location dependence for another. And I also think that's like a really important topic in our space that we need to kind of talk about more.
Yeah. I mean, talk about it. Tell me more. Do we have time? Do you have a few minutes?
I got, yeah, I'm good. But no, I mean, I think it just, there's obviously like a conversation to be had about like the importance of finances in this entire like life costs money. And I'm not like one of these people that's like, if you don't make X, you're like you, but like I I do think it's important to think about like not reducing or not placing importance on finances to such a point to where you get stuck in terms of like your optionality. And like you've been to Thailand before, right?
No, I haven't actually. I was supposed to go COVID year. 20. I was supposed to go 22. I had like tickets booked, trip planned. COVID had other ideas.
There's like there's this image and this sort of like character in Thailand of like the 50-year-old that's like can't leave Thailand. They're like from the US, but they can't leave Thailand because they're like, you know what I mean? They're like so like they somehow have enough just enough money to squeak by like a decent life in Thailand and are kind of like stuck there. And I think it's really important not to get stuck there. And I've seen a lot of like I know people in my life personally that like it became nomadic because they want to have location independence and the freedom to travel and live wherever they want. And I'm like, did you trade one location dependence to like location dependence only in countries like Thailand, the Philippines, like you know what I mean, like that are like cheaper. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you have you ever read the personal finance book, The Automatic Millionaire, by any chance?
No.
It's an older one. It's like something I read at a young age, but it kind of talks about like it's the title makes it sound like it's how do you become a millionaire automatically, like quickly. But what he means more is like automating your finances so that you kind of take yourself and the emotions of money like out of money. And so I've kind of always taken that approach, for better or worse, honestly, sometimes probably like has prevented me from doing some things, but it keeps me like very regimented. So one of the things I did when we moved from the US to Spain, like cost of living went down significantly, but I adjusted our finances so that like it was like we were still living in the US because I didn't want to get trapped. I didn't want us to become so accustomed to one ability to live and not be able to return to the other. And so we've always continued to do that, just like recalibrating for, you know, income coming in or wherever it is that we're living. It's like effectively we're living off the same amount of money and the rest goes into, you know, planning for the
Like
future. But
investments or yeah.
yeah, it's like I don't touch that money, and because I do not want to get trapped. Like very intentionally, I've thought about that, and I say it here, like, you know, not like to brag or anything like that, but to say like that's been a saving grace for me because we went through this exercise recently. We're like, what would it look like if we went back? Like for sure, cost of living goes up a lot. Well, we recalibrate back down, and we're good. And so anyway, I'm very happy I took that step years ago.
Yeah, that kind of it made an impression on me. We came back maybe a couple of years ago. We came back to the US and I went out to dinner with some friends and the bill came and I was like, oh, fuck, this is so much more expensive. Like, you know, it's like your first day back in the US and like, what do you mean the entree's $17? And then kind of like everyone at the table kind of giggled and I was like, what? And they were like, we were waiting for you to say that. Like, it was like the thing that I guess like I've said before. And I was like, huh, that's interesting that like that's they were expecting me to say that and like it has made like not because like it was so expensive that I couldn't afford it, but the fact that I complained about it. And I'm like, okay, how do I readjust so that I don't complain about this? You know?
I had that experience when I was back in the US last time. I went to this burrito place that I loved when I lived in Asheville, North Carolina. And I'm sure the prices have gone up. Inflation's, you know, caused everything to go up, but that's prices have gone up everywhere. So like it's somewhat relative. But I like it was like two burritos, an appetizer, and like two sodas, and it was like $70. And and it did like smack me in the face. And I was like, what? I swear I used to come to this place for like $18. Like sound like, you know, talk about sounding like the old man. Back in my day. So anyway,
can
that
I
was
tell you the other
a
one?
rude shock. Yeah.
The other funny one was we came back I think almost 2 weeks ago and we flew into Michigan, went to Detroit to see Sarah, my wife's family, and then we just actually yesterday got down here to Cincinnati. But we were in Detroit and I went to make breakfast and I cracked an egg in the pan and what came out was this like beige color. You know what I mean? Like the yolk was like not yellow. It was like some different color, but it was not yellow. And Sarah walked up, she's like, why are the eggs that color? And I was like, I was like, what do you mean? She's like, oh my God. Like we got so used to like cracking an egg and seeing like color, you know, like orange come out. And Sarah just had this moment of like, she didn't think about it. She's like, why is the egg that color? Like, is there something like wrong with him? Like, no, we're just in America. Like, you know, this is what eggs look like here. unless you like buy Amish or something, which we actually do for eggs. But yeah, it is. There are these things that you need to like readjust for when you come back, where you're like, eggs look different. They're not yellow. It's some other color. I don't know what it is. I don't know what the name is, but it's not the color that you expect to come out when you crack an egg.
That's hilarious.
That's one of
There
those
are so
funny,
many
yeah.
so many things like that, man. It's like the reverse culture shock of returning home, even on the smallest, like, most minute, funny little things like that. I had a instance last time where I went with some friends to a brewery, and it was like one of those ones where you like walk, like most breweries, you walk up to the counter, you pick one of the beers and they pour it for you, and then that you pay and you walk away. And the tip thing was on there. It was like, do you want to do 18, 22, or 25%? And I was like, there wasn't even a zero option. But in my mind, I legitimately, like, not trying to be funny, I was just like, turned to my friend. I'm like, do you tip for this? And he's like, yeah, of course you tip for this, And I'm like, has it always been that way? And he's like, yeah, of course. And I'm like, has it always been 22%? He's like, oh no, that part's new. But anyway, that was kind of like mind blowing to me.
And the more hipster places, like the places that I like, are the worst with that, where it's like 20, 25, 30%. And I'm like,
that's ridiculous. Come on.
Yeah. I'm like, just raise the price. Like, just tell me what I'm buying. You know what I mean? But yeah, that is one of those culture shocks where when you come from like Mexico or Europe to the US, and it's like massive tipping culture. And it's like, you just have to assume like, oh, it's $10. No, it's 15. Like, this is like the actual price of the.
So something interesting that I've learned about being here in Greece. I've heard this a lot, actually. It's really, and I've seen it a lot. It relates to this. This isn't totally random, but there's this like idea of Greek Americans, which isn't abnormal to a lot of places. Like, a lot of places have, people's parents or grandparents move from wherever, and they move to the U.S. and now
like
their
Italian
kids live
Americans,
here. Yeah, it's not an abnormal thing, but here in Greece, it's a very normal thing for people about, in their like 30s or 40s to have moved back to Greece. They were born here, and at 5-10 years old, they moved to America with their parents. And now they've come back here to live here. And a lot of the local, like, I can't tell you how many times this has come up where someone will say like, oh yeah, well, like they're Greek Americans, they're different. And I'll be like, oh, I'm intrigued. Like, I want to know, tell me more. And so there's all these things that they've kind of like brought back with them to here. And like, just two off the top of my head. One is tipping. Like, I see tipping here in Greece, like the option to tip or the suggestion that you should, much more often, like the expectation, even, I would say, more than anywhere else that I've noticed in Europe. And then the other thing is, and this is like one that we love as Americans, they bring you a giant jug of ice water at your table when you sit down
for free.
And so, yeah, so you sit down at a restaurant, and like, first thing they do is like plop these glasses down in front of you with giant jugs of ice water. And you're like, what? My mom was here. She came to visit us here, and she was like, this just made my day. She's like, I was dreading this part of coming back to Europe because I miss ice water so much while I'm here. I get so thirsty. She even brought like her giant like thermos of water. So anyway, like, it's just funny to see those things spill over.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, like Sarah, as a Eastern Europeaner, I barely drink water, which that was the other really hard thing on 75 hard, was a gallon of water. I was like, how do you drink a gallon of water? This is disgusting.
I can drink two. It's so funny. That's such a funny like dichotomy between Europeans and Americans. I'm like, give me all the water. I'll be in there in the gym class with like people have like a quarter of a liter of water, and I'm like, I literally brought 2 liters of water for this class.
Oh my God. No. Sarah travels with this like giant like 45-ounce like cup bottle thing, and it's the bane of my existence. She puts it in the cup holder in the car, and like, I can't use the stick shift because like the straw's poking out. I have to like dodge. But no, the water thing is very interesting. Yeah, but you know what? Like, being back in the US, I just received a text message from Sarah saying, "Stop shit talking my water bottle on air."
She's listening.
Yeah. But no, there's like, you know what I'm really looking forward to with the US is like our plan with Sarah, kind of like thinking like more long term. We're really going over your podcast time slot, so let me know if people can't
We're
listen
good.
this long to podcasts.
I'm sure people have already
Is
tuned out long. Anybody that's showed up for this one tuned out a long time ago. That's okay. It's just me and you.
is this the third time we're doing this on your podcast?
Yeah, I think so.
Gotcha.
3 times. Yeah. Thanks for coming back.
But yeah, anytime. We should do these more often. I don't know. Maybe people can come on and say like, no, this is never have Mitko on again.
Yeah, I want to hear. Tell me if that's the case. Either way, I want to know.
They can't even see my mustache on the video because that would definitely impact the the opinion of if people want me back or not.
That needs to go in the marketing asset for sure.
It's just a stash. Yeah. Sarah said I should make it part of my branding, like what's his name? What's the soccer show on Apple? The one where he goes to doesn't matter.
Yeah, everybody was talking about this show when I was back in the US a few months ago. Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso. Yeah. You know, like the mustache is his brand. She said I should make the mustache part of my brand. But no, Sarah and I are like really looking forward to like our plan long term in terms of like home base, bringing it back to on topic, is to buy a duplex and rent out one unit to cover the mortgage and then have the other one for ourselves and kind of make Cincinnati like our hard base and then have the ability to like go to Europe. Cause I think I'm accepting that I am not very adventurous. I have no interest in going to countries like, I'm not going to say any countries not to like offend anyone, but I don't want to go to like overly like adventurous countries. At least not for like long-term periods. So,
dude, that's the whole point of this conversation, is just to like bring it back to just do what feels right for you. And I think I know so many people feel a bit trapped in their freedom with the paradox of choice and they work so hard to get location independence. They now have remote work. They're now living abroad, or they're living this quote unquote dream that they wanted. And they're finding themselves like a little bit dissatisfied and in some way or another, like whatever that is, just lean into it and be like, that's cool, man. We're just going to figure out what it is for me. You don't have to live up to anyone else's standards. Like Mitko, you don't have to be the adventurous guy that goes and buys a house in some super exotic place. Like that's not the life that you're going to live. Varna, Bulgaria is what calls to you.
There's a lot. Yeah. My mom said something to me when I was younger in like a completely different context. It was when I was trying to figure out, quote unquote, what to do with my life, which, oh man, can you imagine if 30-year-old me told 22-year-old me like, good luck. You're still going to be thinking about this. But I was in college and I was trying to decide like what to do. And my mom said something to me that has just stuck with me, which was, she said, I don't know how to help you, because growing up under communism, like you had no options. So someone said like your options are these two things, like pick one, you didn't have endless options. And she kind of like admitted to like, in some ways, wow, I really wanted to have like the freedom to do whatever I wanted, in some ways I didn't have this struggle of like deciding what to do. So in some ways, constraints I do think are like beneficial. And I've spoken to like recently people that I'm very good friends with, where like they have the world at their disposal, like kind of like they can do anything, live anywhere, do whatever with their time. And I'm always like, some constraints would actually make you happier. Um, and I think that that's like digital nomads want to rid constraints, but actually some of them would be beneficial.
Totally. There's this guy named George Mumford, I believe is his name. He was like the mindfulness coach for people like Phil Jackson and Michael Jordan and a long list of other people. And his whole thing, or one of his big like pillars, was was like avoiding the dizziness of choice. And so I more or less, I'm not sure if I'm combining a couple different like philosophical ideas here, or this is all him, but most of it is rooted in him. But like the idea is like we make like 3,000 choices a day. And so whatever we can do to reduce the number of choices that we're making every day will actually like increase your happiness. So therefore, adding more optionality to a life that already has a lot of options is going to do the opposite of that. And so the more like there's freedom in routine, there's freedom in stability, there's freedom in 75 hard, right? Like you just did, you did that, like really bringing it full circle here. Like there's some freedom in that, like knowing like I know what I am and am not going to do today, and I don't have to decide between that. That was one of the big things, you know, talking about like my wife quitting drinking for a while. Like she was just like, I don't have to decide if I will have that glass of wine or if I won't. I don't have to like feel guilty if I do or I don't. Like it's just not. And there's something very freeing in that, like removing the optionality.
Yeah. There is also like this thing about like, I do think when you're younger though, you need to taste enough to know where to like create your optionality. Do you know what I mean? Like I think you don't know what you don't know, and you kind of need to like try enough things to kind of say like, all right, I know where my like where I'm gonna like remove things so that I don't have like the uh like too many options. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. You have to figure out what you like to eat, you know, like you got to go out and try a bunch of different things and then just don't feel trapped in like, oh, well, this is what I'm supposed to do for forever. Like, no, it changes. It's fine.
Yeah. I was gonna say I learned that in a really funny way when we did a wine class in Portugal in 2019, and with this sommelier who ended up becoming a friend of ours. It's a whole different story, but he said to me, because I hate fruit. That's like I hate fruit. I don't eat fruits. There's like three that I like. And he said to me, because I'm like, I don't like wine. I don't understand wine. He's like, because you have no palate. He's like, you don't know how to like, he's like, you don't know how to like relate things to, you know, like, because like a whole thing is like, you don't know something smells like grass if you've never, or you don't know how something smells like fresh cut grass if you've like never smelled fresh cut grass. And he's like, you don't eat fruit. So you have like no palate, you know? And I was like, all right, yeah, that makes sense. I'm a Philistine who likes beer, and that's great. You know, everything's just bitter.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, think about the first time you had any like coffee or like first time I tasted coffee, I probably thought it was disgusting. Now I love it. So you got to taste it and acquire the taste and not give up after the first try.
Yeah. What were you gonna ask me?
Oh, is there anything you're really like the space that we live in, the remote work, nomad travel, all this stuff? Anything you're really excited about? Anything that's like jumped out to you recently? I mean, you're writing about some pretty awesome stuff in the newsletter, so I feel like you're like well equipped to be on the cutting edge of a lot of things. So not like looking for you to announce anything big here, but just curious if you've seen anything out there that you're stoked about. If the answer is no, that's fine too.
No, there's a lot of things. I'm just trying to find like maybe like the one that I'm really and we've talked about this off air, but I'm really, really betting big in the same way that years ago I felt remote work was going to be right. I really think this idea of like portfolio careers is going to become far more common, where you you either have like multiple things going on. Obviously, like everyone has a side hustle these days, and like we can kind of talk about and like argue about, is that a good thing, is that a bad thing, like how do you make sure that you're still resting, like how do you make sure that a side hustle is not like killing you. But there's just, you know, especially with like we went through so many layoffs this year, we saw that happening in so many like tech companies, that what happens when someone at some company decides they don't have space for you anymore, and then instead of going to zero, you know, have like some freelance clients on the side that, you know, so that you don't go to zero, you have like optionality, you know, going back to like, you know, optionality and stuff like that. So I think that that's going to become way more common. I think there's going to be like different, I'm starting to spot patterns of different ways of doing it, where like I think some people have a job and they do something that's completely opposite in order to like scratch another itch that they have internally. I see people who are doing it in like a synergy or like a parallel way, which is like I'm an accountant for X company, but I also take on like freelance accounting clients. And then I think there's the people who are doing things with social media, like where they're using their job and commenting on the industry on social media and getting some level of personal branding. And like that's really interesting. So I've been keeping my eye on that a lot. And then also the other one related to that is like changing careers. We've talked about this as well, where I think that that's going to become a far more important skill to have. Is like, okay, you've been a product designer for the last 5 years, but now because of tech and AI, like maybe that's getting squeezed, and so you need to like relearn and like reshape a new career because of like how the industry is changing, and that skill is going to be really important.
I love how that folds into the whole, it's kind of like one and the same, but also can be looked at from a different angle. Because I know you hear this all the time through people, who listen to your podcast or subscribe to the newsletter or whatever, like, hey, I want to build this life abroad. I want to start traveling. I want to, do some of these amazing things now that I have, now that remote work's a thing, but like, I don't have the skills to do that. Like, or I don't have the experience, I've been working in a brick and mortar situation for forever. So I don't have like transferable skills, and we don't need to spend time on this, but like they do have the skills. They just have to repackage them for this new way of working. And so, yeah, there's a lot of opportunity here that's probably still not tapped into. And one of those opportunities is learning how to make those transitions. Like instead of thinking about like climbing the corporate ladder, you can think about it like, climbing horizontally sometimes and then going up from there.
The term I like on that is like squiggly careers. There's a book called The Squiggly Career, and I really like that visualization of it. But yeah, like let's throw this out there. Like this is even on like my audience, like from like the newsletter and everything like that. Like people, when I polled people on this, they were like really interested in this idea of like changing trajectories and like careers and how to do that. And I've been reading a lot about it. I've been researching a lot about it. I've been talking to a lot of people who have made those sort of transitions. And I'm starting to formulate some sort of training around this because I think it's going to be really beneficial for people. So my goal is this quarter Q4 to do like a more like live training on this idea. And then like Q1, I'd like to make it into like an evergreen course. So if anyone's interested in that, like I'll have something in Q4 around that if you're interested.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned it. I'm looking at the time, realizing how long we've gone, so that might be a good place to ask you. Well, let's we can wrap it up there. We can also ask you to leave mention where people can follow along, learn more, and connect with you on that, and then on anything else that we talked about, including the newsletter, the podcast, everything, and we'll have those in the show notes as well, as always.
Yeah, I mean, I'm on social at Mitkoka, Mitkoka. The newsletter is called remoteinsider.xyz. If you go to that link even after we've rebranded, it will still directly to the new website, but the new website will be at workfrommars.co. So depending on when you're listening to this, we should be out with that. So yeah.
Sweet. And the podcast?
The podcast is That Remote Life, but it's also getting rebranded. It's going to be called Work From Mars as well. So we're kind of bringing it all in house because there were like 8 different names under like the same brand. It was becoming a mess. So yeah.
I'll bet there was a sweet spreadsheet involved in that one too. Probably in a beautiful Notion doc. So, all right, man.
Notion
Mitko, this was Mitko. This is awesome. Always good to see you. I'm glad you're settling into this chapter of life and enjoying it so far. And kudos to you for knowing when to pull the plug and make the move back. And look forward to catching up again soon, buddy.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Always fun.
Thanks for tuning in today from wherever you are in the world. Once again, I'm Chase, and this has been another episode of About Abroad. For those of you wondering how you can best support the show, I have made it super simple for you. Just go over to the show notes of the episode that you just finished listening to and click on one of the 2 following links. aboutabroad.com/newsletter to get our monthly newsletter, no spam, guaranteed, or ratethispodcast.com/aboutabroad, where you can quickly and easily leave a review for the show. It's not just important to me, it also helps more wanderers just like you find us. Finally, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. and we will see you again next week. Thanks again. Hasta luego, amigos.